The piercing shriek of a whistle cut through the dusty air of Wickenburg, Arizona territory, as Elizabeth Marsh clutched her swollen belly and pressed her back against the alley wall, desperate to disappear from sight. It was 1878, and the desert town offered little mercy to a woman in her condition, unmarried, abandoned, and 7 months with child. Did you see her? Olivia Edwards caught fragments of harsh whispers as she shifted her position, trying to avoid detection from the trio of finely dressed women who had been trailing her through town like predators stalking wounded prey. "No man will want you with that belly," they had sneered moments earlier on the main street, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "You're damaged goods, Olivia Edwards." Their laughter had driven her into this narrow passage between the general store and the telegraph office. Wickenburg had once been her sanctuary, a fresh start after fleeing St. Louis with dreams of teaching in the expanding territories. Now it felt like a prison, with judgment at every corner since her condition had become impossible to conceal. "Miss Edwards." A deep voice startled her, causing her to nearly lose her balance. Strong hands steadied her shoulders as she found herself looking up into the concerned face of Luke Forrester, the taciturn rancher whose property bordered the schoolhouse where she'd taught until 3 weeks ago, when the town council had regrettably terminated her position. "Mr. Forrester," she acknowledged, embarrassment flooding her cheeks as she attempted to compose herself. The tall cowboy had always been polite in their few interactions, tipping his hat when their paths crossed, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries about the weather or his young niece's progress in her studies. "Are you unwell?" His eyes, the color of faded denim, swept over her with unexpected gentleness, deliberately avoiding lingering on her midsection. "I'm quite fine," she lied, straightening her simple calico dress as best she could, "just seeking respite from the afternoon heat." His expression told her he didn't believe her excuse for a moment. "I heard Mrs. Holloway and her companion speaking unkindly as I was leaving the mercantile," he said carefully. "No one deserves to be spoken to in such a manner." Olivia's throat tightened. "Their words mean nothing to me," she replied, another lie that tasted bitter on her tongue. Luke Forrester studied her face before glancing toward the street. "May I escort you home, Miss Edwards? My wagon is just around the corner." The prospect of walking back onto the main street, where more judgmental eyes awaited, made her stomach clench. Yet the alternative, accepting help from a man she barely knew, went against every rule of propriety she'd been raised to uphold. But propriety, she reflected wryly, had already been thoroughly abandoned according to Wickenburg society. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester, but I wouldn't want to tarnish your reputation by association," she said quietly. Something flickered across his weathered features, not pity, which she had grown to despise, but something fiercer. "Miss Edwards, I don't give a damn what this town thinks of me or who I choose to assist." His profanity, spoken so matter-of-factly, surprised a small laugh out of her. "That's quite evident, Mr. Forrester." For the first time, she saw him smile, just a brief upward tilt of his lips that transformed his solemn face. "Luke," he corrected, "if we're to scandalize the good people of Wickenburg together, we might as well be on familiar terms." Despite everything, Olivia found herself returning his smile. "Olivia, then." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her gloved hand in the crook of his elbow. As they stepped out of the alley onto the boardwalk, she felt the weight of stares pressing down upon them, heard the hushed whispers cease as they passed. Luke's posture remained tall and unflinching beside her, his stride deliberately unhurried. "My wagon's just there," he indicated with a nod toward a well-maintained buckboard hitched to 2 chestnut horses. With surprising deftness, He helped her climb aboard before taking his place beside her. The leather seat creaked beneath their combined weight. "Where to, Miss Olivia?" He corrected himself. "The old Miller place on the edge of town," she directed, referring to the small cottage she rented from the widow Miller, who had moved to Prescott to live with her daughter after her husband's passing last winter. As the wagon pulled away from the hitching post, Olivia caught sight of Esther Holloway and her companions watching from outside the millinery shop, their expressions frozen in scandalized disbelief. She straightened her spine, refusing to cower under their scrutiny. "You're new to Wickenburg," Luke observed as they left the bustle of the main street behind. It wasn't a question. "Nearly 8 months," she replied, then realized the unfortunate coincidence of the time frame. "I came to teach at the schoolhouse," he nodded. "My niece Sally speaks highly of you. She was quite upset when they brought in the new teacher." Olivia swallowed against the sudden lump in her throat. "I miss the children. They were kinder than most." The wagon hit a rut in the road, jostling them both. Luke's hand shot out instinctively to steady her, but he withdrew it quickly once she regained her balance. "I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn," he said after a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, "but I've noticed you don't receive visitors. Is there family you could write to?" "Someone who might—" "No," she interrupted, more sharply than intended. "There's no one." He accepted her answer without pressing further, and they rode in silence until the small whitewashed cottage came into view. It sat alone at the end of a dusty track, with a tired-looking vegetable garden to one side and a solitary cottonwood providing meager shade. Luke brought the wagon to a halt and helped her down with the same careful efficiency he'd shown earlier. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Luke," she said, stepping back from the wagon and onto the packed earth of her dooryard. Instead of climbing back up, Luke studied the cottage with a critical eye. "Your roof has loose shingles," he observed, "and that porch step is rotting through." Olivia's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "Mrs. Miller promised to send someone to make repairs, but I expect she's forgotten." "I could fix them," he offered. "The roof, the step, wouldn't take more than a day's work." "I couldn't impose," she began. "It's no imposition." "I've got the tools and lumber at my ranch." His gaze finally met hers directly. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't." Something in his steady gaze made her hesitate. There was no pity there, no judgment, just a straightforward offer of assistance that seemed to expect nothing in return. After months of navigating the treacherous waters of a society that had marked her as fallen, the simplicity of it was almost disorienting. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally, needing to understand. Luke removed his hat, running a hand through his sun-streaked brown hair. "Because it needs doing and I'm able to do it," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "and because this town has been unkind to you when kindness costs so little." The unexpectedness of his candor caught her off guard, and Olivia found herself nodding before she could second-guess the wisdom of allowing a man she barely knew to work on her home. "Thank you," she said. "That would be most appreciated." "I'll come by Saturday morning if that suits," he said, replacing his hat. "Saturday would be fine." He climbed back onto the wagon seat. "Good day, Olivia," he said, tipping his hat. "Good day, Luke," she returned, watching as he turned the wagon around and headed back toward town. Only after the dust from his departure had settled did Olivia realize that, throughout their entire interaction, Luke Forrester's eyes hadn't once lingered judgmentally on her swollen belly. In a town where her condition had become her only defining feature, his restraint felt like the rarest form of respect. True to his word, Luke arrived early Saturday morning, his wagon loaded with tools and materials. Olivia, who had risen at dawn to bake bread and prepare for his arrival, watched from her kitchen window as he efficiently unloaded supplies and set to work on the sagging porch step, without disturbing her. The rhythmic sound of his hammer eventually drew her outside, a pitcher of lemonade and a glass in hand. "You've made progress," she observed, noting the new planks already in place. Luke straightened, wiping perspiration from his brow with his forearm. Wood was more rotten than it looked. "Had to replace the whole bottom step." "I've brought refreshment," she offered, pouring a glass of lemonade. "It's the least I can do." He accepted the drink with a nod of thanks, draining it quickly. The morning was already hot, promising a scorching afternoon ahead. "Much appreciated." As she took the empty glass, their fingers brushed briefly. Olivia found herself noticing details she hadn't before: the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the careful way he held himself, as if perpetually conscious of his size and strength. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the man who was repairing her home. "Going on 5 years," he replied, selecting another board from his pile of lumber. "Bought it from old Tom Fletcher when he decided Arizona was too hot and moved to Oregon." "It's the Double F, isn't it? North of town." He glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "You know it only by reputation. Some of my students' parents worked for you. They spoke highly of your fairness." Luke's expression softened slightly. "Good men, they work hard." He positioned the new board. "What about you? Teaching always your ambition?" The question was innocent enough, but it sent Olivia's mind spiraling back to a life that seemed increasingly distant, a comfortable scent. Louis home, plans for college, dreams of adventure before settling into the respectability of a teacher's life. Before James Harrington had swept into her world with promises as empty as the desert sky. "Yes," she said finally, "though I didn't expect to practice my profession quite so far west." Luke seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate. He returned to his work, the conversation lapsing into a companionable silence broken only by the sounds of construction. By midday, the porch steps were completely rebuilt, sturdy and even. Luke paused only long enough to eat the simple lunch. Olivia provided fresh bread, cheese, and dried apple slices before turning his attention to the roof. Watching him work from below, Olivia found herself wondering about this taciturn cowboy who seemed untroubled by the gossip that would surely follow his assistance to the town pariah. Was it simple kindness that motivated him, or something else? She had learned the hard way that men's motives were not always what they appeared. The baby kicked vigorously, as if sharing her suspicion. Olivia placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that had become automatic in recent months. "Hush now," she murmured. "Mr. Forrester is being kind, that's all." "Did you say something?" Luke called down from the roof. Embarrassed to be caught talking to her unborn child, Olivia shook her head. "Just thinking aloud." By late afternoon, the roof repairs were complete. Luke gathered his tools methodically, cleaning each one before returning it to his toolbox. "Thank you," Olivia said as he loaded the last of his supplies into the wagon. "I don't know how to properly repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," he replied. Then, hesitating briefly, "Though I wouldn't object to another loaf of that bread sometime. Best I've had since my mother's." The compliment, so unexpectedly personal, brought warmth to Olivia's cheeks. "I could have one ready tomorrow if you'd care to stop by and collect it." Luke considered this, his expression unreadable. Tomorrow's Sunday. The implication was clear: Sunday meant church, and church meant the entire town gathered in one place with all their judgments and whispers. Olivia hadn't attended services since her condition had become evident, unable to bear the thought of contaminating the sanctuary with her fallen status. "Perhaps another time then," she said quietly. Luke studied her face for a moment. "I'll come by after services," he decided. "Around 1 o'clock, if that's suitable." "That would be fine," she agreed, surprised by the decision. He nodded once decisively, then climbed onto his wagon. As he took up the reins, he paused, looking back at her. "The repairs should hold through the monsoon season, but if you notice any leaks or problems, send word to the ranch." "I will. Thank you again." As his wagon disappeared down the dusty road, Olivia stood on her newly repaired porch, puzzling over the enigma of Luke Forrester, a man who seemed determined to defy the town's unwritten rules about how a fallen woman should be treated. The following afternoon, Luke arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes that, while simple, were clearly his Sunday best. The transformation from the work-worn cowboy of the previous day was striking. "You look very proper," Olivia observed as she invited him inside, self-conscious of her own faded dress and the simplicity of her small home. "Church clothes," he explained, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Pastor Jenkins gave an especially long sermon today about the wages of sin. Thought I might fall asleep right there in the pew." There was a hint of dry humor in his voice that made Olivia wonder if the sermon's topic had been directed at her situation, or perhaps at Luke's association with her. The thought brought both guilt and an unexpected surge of defiance. "I've prepared the bread as promised," she said, gesturing to the cloth-wrapped loaf on her small table. "And some preserves to go with it, if you'd care for refreshment before you leave." Luke glanced around the cottage, taking in the meticulous neatness, the small touches that made the rented space a home, a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, a colorful quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair, books stacked on every available surface. "You're fond of reading," he observed. "Books have been my constant companions," she admitted. "Especially lately." He nodded toward a worn copy of Wuthering Heights on the table beside the rocking chair. "My sister Caroline was devoted to that one. Read it so many times the binding fell apart." The mention of his sister, offered so casually, felt like an invitation to step beyond the careful formality that had characterized their interactions. "You have a large family?" Olivia asked, setting out plates and cutting 2 slices of the fresh bread. Luke settled into the chair she indicated, his large frame making the simple furniture seem diminished. "Just Caroline now. She passed 5 years ago influenza. Her daughter Sally lives with me." "I'm sorry for your loss," Olivia said softly, recognizing in his matter-of-fact tone the same quality she strived for when speaking of her own grief. "Sally is a delightful child, very bright." A genuine smile warmed his features. "Too smart for her own good sometimes. Asks questions I can't begin to answer." "The best kind of student," Olivia said, passing him a plate. Their fingers brushed again, and this time the contact lingered a moment longer than necessary. As they shared the simple meal, conversation flowed more easily than Olivia had anticipated. Luke spoke of his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in the harsh Arizona environment, his hopes of expanding his operation if the railroad came through as planned. Olivia found herself sharing stories of her students, the joy of watching young minds develop, even venturing to speak briefly of her life before Wickenburg. "I came west seeking adventure," she admitted. "St. Louis seemed too confined, too predictable." "And did you find it? Adventure?" Luke asked, his gaze direct. Olivia's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. "Not the kind I imagined," she said quietly. Luke's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected understanding rather than judgment. "Adventure rarely comes in the package we expect." The conversation paused as Olivia cleared their plates. Outside, clouds were gathering on the horizon, unusual for the season. "Looks like rain," she observed, grateful for the change of subject. Luke moved to the window, studying the darkening sky. "Might be a dust storm first. They blow up quick this time of year." As if confirming his prediction, a gust of wind rattled the windows and the quality of light outside changed, taking on an ominous yellow hue. "I should head back before it hits," Luke said, reaching for his hat. "Thank you for the bread and company." Olivia followed him to the door, oddly reluctant to see him leave. "Thank you for coming." He paused on the threshold, turning back to her. "Olivia," he began, then hesitated, seeming to wrestle with his words. "If you ever need anything supplies from town, or help around the place, you need only send word." The offer hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. "That's very kind," she replied carefully. Luke placed his hat on his head, his expression once again unreadable. "Good day, Olivia." "Good day, Luke." She watched from the doorway as he drove away, the approaching storm casting strange shadows across the landscape. Only when his wagon had disappeared from view did she close the door, pressing her back against it as she had in the alley days before, though for entirely different reasons. This time, it wasn't shame or fear that quickened her pulse, but something far more dangerous: hope, tentative and fragile, taking root where she'd believed nothing could grow again. The storm struck with unexpected ferocity, lasting through the night and into the following day. By Tuesday morning, the usually dry creek bed behind Olivia's cottage had transformed into a rushing torrent, and the path to town was a muddy quagmire. Assessing her supplies, Olivia realized with dismay that her flour and sugar were running dangerously low, necessities she'd planned to purchase in town before the storm made travel impossible. As she contemplated her options, a wagon appeared on the horizon, laboring through the mud toward her cottage. Even at a distance, she recognized Luke's broad shoulders and the distinctive gait of his chestnut team. He arrived mud-splattered and grim-faced, bringing news that the storm had caused considerable damage in town. "Bridge over Hassayampa is washed out," he reported as he helped unload supplies he'd brought: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and other essentials she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "Could be a week before it's passable again." "You shouldn't have risked the journey," Olivia chided, though she was deeply grateful for his foresight. "Wasn't sure you had enough provisions," he replied simply. "Sally insisted we check on you. She's worried about her favorite teacher." The mention of his niece's concern touched Olivia deeply. "Please thank her for me. I've missed her bright face in my classroom." Luke's expression softened. "She misses you too. Complains that Mrs. Pemberton doesn't tell stories the way you do." A pang of longing for her former life struck Olivia. "Children are often the best judges of character," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "Indeed they are," Luke agreed, his gaze drifting to her midsection momentarily before returning to her face. "How are you faring? With the baby, I mean." The direct question, asked without judgment or innuendo, caught Olivia off guard. Since arriving in Wickenburg, no one had inquired after her welfare or the child's with genuine concern, only morbid curiosity or condemnation. "We're well," she answered cautiously. "Though I confess I'm apprehensive about the coming months." Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My sister had a difficult time with Sally, if not for the midwife." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Have you arranged for someone to attend you?" The question touched on Olivia's greatest fear: facing childbirth alone, without medical assistance, or even the comfort of a sympathetic presence. Mrs. Holloway's husband, the town's only doctor, had made it clear his services were reserved for respectable patients, and the local midwife had been similarly reluctant to commit to helping a woman of her situation. "I'm exploring my options," she said vaguely, unwilling to admit the full extent of her isolation. Luke seemed to read between the lines of her evasive answer. "Mrs. Redhorse at the ranch, one of our cook's relatives, she's helped deliver most of the children born to our ranch hands' families. She has a gift for it." The offer, implied rather than stated outright, hung in the air between them. "That's very kind," Olivia said carefully, "but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. She'd be glad to help." His gaze held hers steadily. "No one should face such a thing alone, Olivia." The simple truth of his statement threatened to unravel the careful composure she'd maintained for months. Olivia turned away, blinking back sudden tears. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll consider it." Luke accepted her response without pressing further. "I should head back before the creek rises any higher," he said, moving toward the door. "If you need anything before the bridge is repaired, hang a red cloth from your porch post. I'll check each morning." "You've done more than enough already," Olivia protested. "I can't ask for further assistance." "You're not asking, I'm offering." The quiet certainty in his voice brooked no argument. "Neighbors help neighbors in these parts. It's how we survive." As he stepped onto the porch, the skies opened again, rain sheeting down with renewed intensity. Luke grimaced at the deluge. "Looks like I may have waited too long." Olivia peered past him at the worsening storm. "You can't travel in this. It would be dangerous." Before she could reconsider the impropriety, she added, "You must stay until it passes." Luke hesitated, clearly weighing the risks of travel against the potential damage to her already precarious reputation if he remained. "I could wait in the barn," he suggested, nodding toward the small outbuilding where Mrs. Miller's late husband had once kept a milk cow and chickens. "Don't be ridiculous," Olivia replied with more confidence than she felt. "The roof leaks worse than this cottage did before your repairs. You'll catch your death." She stepped back from the doorway. "Please come inside, at least until the worst passes." After a moment's further consideration, Luke nodded once and re-entered the cottage, removing his dripping hat and coat. "Much obliged," he said formally, remaining near the door as if establishing a clear boundary. An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken awareness of their unusual situation. Olivia moved to the small stove, grateful for a practical task to occupy her hands and thoughts. "I'll make coffee," she said, "to ward off the chill." As she busied herself with the familiar ritual, Luke remained standing, seemingly uncertain where to position himself in the confined space. Only when she gestured toward the table did he finally take a seat, his large frame making the chair creak in protest. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning flashing close enough to illuminate the cottage interior in brief, stark bursts. Thunder followed immediately, the kind of booming crack that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. "Creek will be over its banks soon," Luke observed grimly. "You're high enough here that flooding shouldn't reach the cottage, but worth keeping an eye on." His concern prompted Olivia to glance toward the rear window, where she could just make out the usually placid creek, now a churning brown mass steadily rising up its banks. "It's never come close to the cottage before," she said, setting a steaming cup before him. "Never seen a storm like this in June," Luke replied, wrapping his hands around the cup. "Weather's been strange this year." The conversation lapsed again as they sipped their coffee, the howling wind and drumming rain filling the silence. Olivia found herself studying Luke surreptitiously, noting how even seated at her small table, he maintained a certain alertness, his posture straight but not rigid, his gaze frequently moving to the windows as if assessing potential threats. "You were a soldier," she said suddenly, the realization crystallizing from a dozen small observations. Luke's gaze snapped to her face, surprise evident in his expression. "How did you know? The way you carry yourself," she explained. "My father was in the Mexican War. You have the same watchfulness." He nodded slowly, a new respect in his eyes. "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63, served until Appomattox." "You were very young," Olivia observed, quickly calculating that he couldn't have been more than 17 or 18 at enlistment. "Old enough," he said simply, and something in his tone told her that, like many veterans, he preferred not to discuss those years. Respecting his reticence, Olivia changed the subject. "How did you come to settle in Wickenburg? It seems far removed from battlefields." The tension in Luke's shoulders eased slightly. "Wanted open spaces after the war. Worked cattle drives in Texas, then trail boss jobs. Saved every penny until I could buy my own spread." A small smile touched his lips. "First time I saw the Sonoran Desert, thought it was the strangest, most beautiful place I'd ever encountered." "It grows on you, doesn't it?" Olivia agreed. "When I first arrived, I thought it barren. Now I see life everywhere the way plants adapt. Animals find water where none seems possible." "Resilience," Luke said with a nod. "Nature's greatest lesson out here." Their eyes met over the table, and Olivia felt an unexpected connection, two transplants who had found something essential in this harsh landscape, something that spoke to their own capacity for endurance. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the window frames, drawing their attention back to the storm. Luke rose and moved to check the front door's security. "This isn't letting up anytime soon," he observed. "I should see to my team make sure they're sheltered as best they can be." He donned his still damp coat and hat, bracing himself before stepping out into the deluge. Through the window, Olivia watched as he battled the wind and rain to reach his horses, unhitching them from the wagon and leading them toward the small barn. Despite the poor visibility, his movements remained efficient and purposeful. When he returned some 10 minutes later, he was soaked through, water streaming from his clothing onto her clean floor. "I'm making a mess," he apologized, remaining on the small mat by the door. "You'll catch pneumonia standing there," Olivia chided, retrieving a towel from her meager linen supply. "Your coat, please." After a moment's hesitation, Luke removed the sodden garment along with his hat. Olivia tried not to notice how his wet shirt clung to the broad planes of his chest and shoulders as she took the items and hung them near the stove to dry. "The horses?" she asked, handing him the towel. "Secure in the barn," he replied, running the towel over his hair. "Found some old blankets to put over them. They'll weather it fine." The storm showed no signs of abating as afternoon stretched into evening. By silent mutual agreement, they avoided any discussion of Luke leaving before morning. Instead, they shared a simple meal of beans and the last of Olivia's bread, their conversation gradually becoming more comfortable as they discovered shared interests, a love of history, opinions on the territorial politics that dominated newspaper headlines, stories of the colorful characters who made their homes in frontier communities. "Sally asked me an interesting question last week," Luke said, as Olivia cleared their plates. "Wanted to know why we call this the Wild West when most days are so ordinary. Said she expected more excitement from the history books she reads." Olivia laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her with its freedom. "That sounds like Sally. She once asked me why the geography primer called Arizona a desert wasteland when she could see flowers blooming right outside the schoolhouse window." "What did you tell her?" "That people often write about places they've never truly seen," Olivia replied, remembering the earnest faces of her students. And that sometimes beauty reveals itself only to those willing to look beyond first impressions. Luke studied her face, his expression thoughtful. Wise counsel. As night fell, the practical matter of sleeping arrangements could no longer be avoided. The cottage consisted of just 2 rooms, the main living area with its kitchen and sitting space, and Olivia's small bedroom. "I'll be comfortable here," Luke insisted, indicating the rocking chair near the stove. "Slept in far worse conditions." "At least take the quilt," Olivia offered, retrieving her warmest blanket from her bedroom. Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, and neither immediately pulled away. For a suspended moment, they stood close enough that Olivia could detect the faint scent of soap beneath the lingering dampness of rain on his skin. "Thank you," Luke said quietly, his voice lower than usual, "for your hospitality." "Thank you for checking on me," she returned, reluctantly stepping back. "Good night, Luke." "Good night, Olivia." In her bedroom, Olivia changed into her nightgown with trembling fingers, acutely aware of the man sitting just beyond her closed door. It had been months since she'd been in such proximity to a man, not since James had disappeared from her life upon learning of her condition, his promises of marriage evaporating like morning dew under the desert sun. Yet Luke's presence brought none of the shame or regret that thoughts of James evoked. Instead, she felt an unfamiliar sense of security, as if the storm that had driven him to her door had also swept away some of the isolation that had been her constant companion. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the continuing storm and the occasional creak of the rocking chair as Luke shifted his position in the other room. Each time she woke, Olivia found herself listening for those small sounds, reassured by the evidence of his presence. Morning arrived with surprising suddenness, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Olivia dressed quickly in the pale dawn light filtering through her window, conscious of propriety now that the emergency had passed. When she emerged from her bedroom, she found Luke already awake, stoking the stove's embers back to life. He had folded the quilt neatly and returned it to the back of the rocking chair. "Good morning," he greeted her, straightening. "Hope I didn't wake you." "Not at all," she assured him. "Has the storm passed completely?" "Seems so," he replied, moving to the window to survey the damage. "Creek still high but receding. Road will be muddy but passable." The return of normalcy brought with it an awkward awareness of their unusual circumstances. Olivia busied herself preparing a simple breakfast of oatmeal, while Luke stepped outside to check on his team. They ate quickly, conversation limited to practical matters: the condition of the roads, the likelihood of the bridge repairs, whether additional rain might follow. It was as if the ease they had discovered the previous evening had retreated with the storm, leaving uncertainty in its wake. As Luke prepared to depart, Olivia handed him a carefully wrapped package. "The remainder of the bread," she explained, "for Sally." His fingers closed around the package, his expression softening at the mention of his niece. "She'll be delighted. Been worried about you since you left the school. Please tell her I'm well," Olivia said, suddenly longing to see the bright-eyed child who had been among her favorite students. "And that I miss our reading sessions." Luke studied her face for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Why not tell her yourself? Come to dinner at the ranch this Sunday." The invitation was so unexpected that Olivia could only stare at him, certain she had misheard. "Sally would be overjoyed," he continued. "And Mrs. Redhorse, the midwife I mentioned, she'll be there. You could meet her, see if you're comfortable with her assistance when the time comes." The practical consideration penetrated Olivia's surprise. Meeting the midwife was indeed a pressing concern, one she had been avoiding out of fear and pride, yet to visit Luke's ranch, to be seen as his guest. The town would talk, she said finally, voicing the obvious objection. The town already talks, Luke countered. Has that stopped you from living your life? The question struck Olivia with unexpected force. In truth, she had allowed the town's judgment to constrain her, to shrink her world to the confines of her small cottage and the occasional necessary venture for supplies. She had accepted their verdict that she should exist in the shadows, her shame on display but her humanity invisible. No, she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her response. It hasn't. A smile the most genuine she had yet seen from him transformed Luke's solemn features. Good. I'll send the wagon for you at noon on Sunday. As he climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins, Olivia felt a curious lightness in her chest, as if some constricting band had loosened. Thank you, Luke, she called as the wagon began to move. For everything. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, his smile lingering as he guided his team toward the muddy road to town. Watching him depart, Olivia placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. Well, she murmured, it seems we have a dinner invitation. The days leading up to Sunday passed with excruciating slowness. The bridge repair progressed faster than anticipated, and by Thursday, traffic between Wickenburg proper and the outlying farms and ranches had resumed. Olivia used the opportunity to visit the mercantile for essentials, bracing herself for the usual whispers and sidelong glances. To her surprise, Mrs. Thompson, the storekeeper's wife who had previously been coldly polite at best, greeted her with something approaching warmth. Miss Edwards, good to see you well after that dreadful storm. Heard the creek behind your place nearly overflowed. Startled by the friendly overture, Olivia responded cautiously. It came close, but the cottage remained dry, thankfully. Mr. Forrester mentioned he checked on you during the worst of it, Mrs. Thompson continued, her tone deliberately casual as she wrapped Olivia's purchases. Said several properties out that way were at risk. So that was it. Luke had provided her with a respectable explanation for his presence at her home during the storm. The gesture was both considerate and clever, diffusing potential gossip before it could take root. Yes, Mr. Forrester was quite neighborly, Olivia confirmed, maintaining the fiction. He brought supplies when he realized the bridge was washed out. Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly. Good man, that Luke Forrester. Runs a tight operation out at the Double F. My Thomas says he's the fairest rancher to work for in the territory. By the time Olivia left the store, she realized that Luke's reputation in town was more substantial than she had understood. His standing as a successful rancher and employer, combined with his evident decency, afforded him a degree of social latitude that she, as an unmarried schoolteacher in disgrace, had never possessed. Sunday dawned clear and hot, the recent storm leaving no trace except for greener vegetation and fuller water barrels. As promised, Luke's wagon arrived precisely at noon, though it was not Luke himself who drove it but a young ranch hand who introduced himself as Miguel. Mr. Forrester sends his apologies, Miss Edwards, the young man explained as he helped her into the wagon. Had to handle an issue with some strays. He'll meet us at the ranch house. The journey to the Double F took nearly an hour, the road winding through increasingly verdant landscape as they left the town behind. Olivia found herself relaxing as Miguel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about life on the ranch, his evident respect for his employer confirming what Mrs. Thompson had suggested about Luke's character. The ranch house itself was a pleasant surprise, not the rough bachelor quarters Olivia had half expected, but a well-maintained two-story structure with a wide veranda and carefully tended flower beds along its perimeter. A large barn and several outbuildings completed the central compound, with corrals and pens arranged in an orderly fashion. As Miguel brought the wagon to a halt before the main house, the front door burst open and a small figure flew down the steps. "Miss Edwards, you really came." Sally Forrester, her braids flying behind her, raced toward the wagon with uncontained enthusiasm. "Careful now," Miguel cautioned, helping Olivia descend. "Miss Edwards needs to take it slow." Sally skidded to a halt, her expression becoming comically serious as she noticed Olivia's condition for the first time. "Uncle Luke said you're going to have a baby," she stated matter-of-factly. "Is that why Mrs. Holloway said those mean things about you in church, Sally?" Luke's voice carried from the porch, where he had appeared just in time to hear his niece's artless question. "That's not how we welcome guests." The girl's face fell. "Sorry, Miss Edwards. Uncle Luke says I need to think more before I speak." Olivia couldn't help but smile at the child's earnest apology. "It's quite all right, Sally. And yes, that's part of why some people in town have been unkind, but your uncle has been a true friend to me." Luke descended the steps, and Olivia was struck again by his imposing presence, tall and broad-shouldered in clean work clothes, his hair still damp from a recent washing. "Welcome to the Double F," he greeted her, his usual reserve softened by what appeared to be genuine pleasure at her arrival. "Thank you for inviting me," Olivia replied, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and the ribbon she had threaded through her hair in a small concession to vanity. "Mrs. Redhorse is looking forward to meeting you," he said, offering his arm to assist her up the steps. "She's in the kitchen now, finishing dinner preparations." Inside, the house revealed itself to be both practical and comfortable, solid furniture built for durability rather than fashion, walls adorned with a few quality paintings, bookshelves filled with an eclectic collection that suggested genuine interest rather than mere decoration. "Uncle Luke reads every night," Sally informed her, noticing Olivia's interest in the library. "Even after working all day. He says a man who stops learning might as well stop breathing." Luke's neck reddened slightly at his niece's revelation. "Sally, why don't you show Miss Edwards to the washroom while I check on dinner?" The girl eagerly led Olivia to a small room off the main hallway, chattering all the way about her life on the ranch, her pony named Copper, and how much she missed Miss Edwards' stories at school. "Mrs. Pemberton only reads from the primer," she complained. "Never any exciting tales." "Perhaps I could bring you a book from my collection next time," Olivia offered without thinking, then paused, uncertain if there would be a next time. Sally's face lit up. "Would you?" "Uncle Luke said you might visit again if today goes well." The casual statement, delivered with a child's innocent directness, sent a flutter through Olivia's chest. Had Luke spoken of her to Sally beyond explaining the dinner invitation? Did he truly anticipate further visits? When they returned to the main room, they found Luke waiting with an elderly Native American woman whose deeply lined face held both wisdom and humor in equal measure. "Olivia, this is Mrs. Martha Redhorse," Luke introduced them. "Mrs. Redhorse, Miss Olivia Edwards." The older woman extended gnarled hands to clasp Olivia's, her dark eyes making a quick but comprehensive assessment. "About 7 months along, I think," she said without preamble. "First child." Caught off guard by the directness, Olivia could only nod. "Good strong heartbeat, Mrs. Redhorse continued, her hand still holding Olivia's. "I hear it even now. The child is well positioned." She released Olivia's hands with a satisfied nod. "We will talk more after we eat. Luke has prepared a feast in your honor." Luke cooked. Olivia couldn't hide her surprise as they moved toward the dining room, where a table was set with surprisingly elegant dishware. Mrs. Redhorse chuckled. "He insisted. Says my stew is too spicy for delicate conditions." As if I haven't delivered hundreds of babies, most of whose mothers ate my cooking right up to their time. The meal proved to be a revelation not just in Luke's unexpected culinary skills, but in the easy camaraderie between the rancher, his niece, and Mrs. Redhorse. They included Olivia in their conversation seamlessly, drawing her into discussions of ranch operations, local news, and Sally's education. Not once did anyone refer to her condition in terms of scandal or shame. It was simply accepted as a fact, like the weather or the season. After the meal, while Sally helped Luke clear the table, Mrs. Redhorse led Olivia to a comfortable chair in the sitting room. "Now we talk seriously," the older woman said, lowering herself onto a footstool beside Olivia. "Luke says you have no one to help when your time comes." "That's correct," Olivia admitted. "My situation makes finding assistance difficult." Mrs. Redhorse made a dismissive sound. "Foolishness. A child coming into the world deserves all help possible, no matter what stories adults tell about its beginning." She fixed Olivia with a penetrating gaze. "I will attend you. When the time is near, you will come here, or I will come to you if that is your preference." Relief washed over Olivia with such force that tears sprang to her eyes. "I'm very grateful," she managed. "But I can't impose." "No imposition," Mrs. Redhorse interrupted firmly. "Luke has already arranged it. He values you highly." The last statement was delivered with a significant look that sent warmth flooding to Olivia's cheeks. Before Olivia could formulate a response, Sally bounded into the room. "Miss Edwards, will you read to me before you leave? Uncle Luke says you can pick any book from his library." Grateful for the diversion, Olivia allowed herself to be led to the bookshelves, where she selected a volume of Washington Irving's tales that seemed appropriate for Sally's age. They settled on the sofa, Sally pressed against her side, while Luke and Mrs. Redhorse conversed quietly in the kitchen. As Olivia read Rip Van Winkle, bringing the characters to life with different voices as she had done in her classroom, she became aware of Luke watching from the doorway, his expression unguarded in a way she had not seen before. The warmth in his gaze created a curious tightness in her chest, a feeling both unfamiliar and achingly welcome. Too soon, it was time for her to return to town before darkness fell. Luke insisted on driving her himself, despite Miguel's offer to handle the task. "I need to discuss some business with Miss Edwards," he explained, helping her into the wagon with careful hands. Sally hugged her tightly before she left, extracting promises of another visit soon. Mrs. Redhorse merely nodded, her knowing eyes following them as Luke guided the wagon down the drive. They rode in companionable silence for several minutes, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the landscape. Olivia found herself reluctant to break the peaceful moment, aware that once they returned to the boundaries of Wickenburg proper, the complicated reality of her situation would reassert itself. "Thank you for today," she said finally. It was restorative to be treated as something other than a cautionary tale. Luke's hands tightened on the reins briefly. "You've never been that to me, Olivia." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. "What have I been to you, then?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He was silent for so long that Olivia began to regret the question. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "When I first saw you in town before all this, I thought you were the most dignified woman I'd ever encountered. The way you spoke to the children, how you carried yourself. There was a grace about you that seemed out of place in Wickenburg." Olivia's breath caught at this unexpected revelation. "You noticed me before?" Luke nodded, his profile strong against the setting sun. "Noticed you at the Founders' Day celebration last fall. You were teaching the children of Virginia Reel, thought about introducing myself, but, she prompted when he trailed off. A rueful smile touched his lips. Seemed presumptuous. Town's new schoolteacher, educated and refined, wouldn't have much interest in a rough cowboy with dirt under his fingernails. The admission that he had observed her, perhaps even admired her from afar, shifted something fundamental in Olivia's understanding of their relationship. It hadn't begun in an alley with her in disgrace. It had roots that preceded her downfall. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke glanced at her, his expression serious. "Now I know you're even stronger than I thought. Takes courage to face what you have the town's judgment, preparing for a child alone." It wasn't quite the answer Olivia had hoped for, yet there was something deeply affirming in being seen as strong rather than fallen. "Your support has made it easier to bear," she said honestly. They were approaching the outskirts of town, the church steeple visible in the distance. Luke slowed the horses, turning to face her fully. "Olivia, there's something I need to ask you." The solemnity of his tone sent a ripple of apprehension through her. "Yes. Would you consider teaching Sally?" "Privately at the ranch. I can pay you a fair wage, more than the school board offered." Of all the questions she might have anticipated, this was not among them. "Teach Sally, but she attends the town school." "She's miserable there now," Luke explained. "The other children, they've heard things." "Said things? About you, about why you left?" His jaw tightened. "About my visiting you." Understanding dawned with painful clarity. "They're being cruel to her because of me, because of your kindness to me." "Sally's a resilient girl, but this is hard for her to understand," Luke said. "And frankly, I'm not impressed with Mrs. Pemberton's methods. Sally learned more from you in 4 months than she has all year with others." The offer was tempting, a chance to teach again, to escape the isolation of her cottage, to be useful and valued. Yet Olivia couldn't ignore the implications. "If I teach at your ranch, the gossip will only intensify," she pointed out. "For both of us, for Sally." "Let them talk," Luke said, with a flash of the same defiance she'd glimpsed that first day in the alley. "I care more about Sally's education and happiness than Wickenburg's approval." Olivia considered his offer, weighing the practical benefits against the potential cost to his reputation and Sally's social standing. "I would need to come 3 days a week, at minimum," she said slowly. "A proper education requires consistency." The tension in Luke's shoulders visibly eased. "So you'll do it?" "Yes," Olivia decided, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "I would be honored to teach Sally." The smile that transformed his features was like sunrise breaking across the desert, sudden, brilliant, revealing aspects of the landscape previously hidden in shadow. "Thank you," he said simply. As they continued toward her cottage, Olivia felt a curious sense of rightness, as if pieces of her fractured life were beginning to realign in an unexpected but harmonious pattern. The future remained uncertain, her child's birth a looming threshold beyond which she could not clearly see. Yet for the first time since discovering her condition, she felt not just resignation but genuine hope, not for rescue or redemption, but for the possibility of building something worthwhile from the ruins of her previous plans. The arrangement began the following week, with Miguel arriving in the wagon each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning to transport Olivia to the Double F. Luke had converted a small room off the main parlor into a schoolroom, complete with a blackboard, desk, and bookshelves stocked with texts he had ordered specially from Prescott. "This is far better equipped than the town school," Olivia observed on her first day, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the new desk. "Wanted to do it properly," Luke replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "Sally deserves the best education possible out here." Under Olivia's guidance, Sally thrived. The girl's natural intelligence, previously constrained by the rigid structure of the town school, blossomed in the one-on-one setting. Olivia expanded the curriculum beyond basic reading and ciphering to include natural sciences, history, and even rudimentary Spanish practical knowledge for life in the Arizona Territory. Luke often found reasons to be near the schoolroom during lessons, ostensibly working on ranch accounts or reviewing correspondence, but frequently pausing to observe the interactions between teacher and student. Olivia became accustomed to his quiet presence, occasionally catching his eye when Sally made a particularly insightful comment or mastered a difficult concept. As July stretched into August, Olivia's condition became increasingly apparent. The baby was active, sometimes kicking vigorously enough to be visible through her dresses. Sally was fascinated, asking endless questions about the baby and birth that Olivia answered as truthfully as age-appropriate considerations allowed. Mrs. Redhorse visited regularly, checking Olivia's progress with experienced hands and sharp eyes. "Strong mother, strong child," she pronounced after one such examination. "Another 6 weeks, I think. Maybe less." The timeline sent a jolt of anxiety through Olivia. Despite the midwife's confidence, the approaching reality of childbirth and motherhood sometimes overwhelmed her in quiet moments. On one such occasion, Luke found her on the veranda after Sally's lessons, staring unseeing at the distant mountains. "Copper penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside her. Olivia attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not sure they're worth even that much." "Try me," he encouraged, his steady gaze inviting confidence. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia voiced the fear that had been growing alongside her child. "What kind of mother will I be? I have no family to guide me, no experience with infants. Sometimes I wonder if I'm simply fooling myself pretending I can manage this when in reality." "In reality, you'll be an exceptional mother," Luke finished for her, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "I've watched you with Sally. You're patient, kind, but firm, observant of her needs. Those same qualities will serve you well with your child." The simple faith in his assessment eased something tight in Olivia's chest. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing possibilities in me that sometimes I cannot see myself." Luke's hand moved across the space between them, covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. "That works both ways, Olivia." The contact, warm and reassuring, lingered longer than propriety might dictate. When Luke finally withdrew his hand, Olivia felt the absence keenly. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," he said, his gaze now fixed on the same distant mountains that had captured her attention earlier. "About your living situation after the baby comes." A chill ran through Olivia despite the August heat. "Has Mrs. Miller written? Is she selling the cottage?" The precariousness of her housing had been a persistent worry. "No, nothing like that," Luke hastened to assure her. "But that cottage is isolated, the roof still needs work despite my patches, and winter will be here before we know it." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Mrs. Redhorse's daughter has a small house on the edge of ranch property. 2 rooms, solid construction. It's been vacant since she moved to Prescott last spring. I thought, that is, I wanted to offer it to you as part of your compensation for teaching Sally." The proposal was so unexpected that Olivia could only stare at him, trying to process the implications. "You want me to live on your ranch? The house is nearly a mile from the main compound," he clarified. "Independent, but close enough that help would be available if needed. For you and the baby." The practical advantages were undeniable: better shelter, proximity to Mrs. Redhorse, the security of not being entirely alone with a newborn. Yet Olivia couldn't ignore the potential consequences for Luke's standing in the community. The town would assume. She began delicately. "I don't care what the town assumes," Luke interrupted, a rare flash of temper coloring his voice. "I care about your safety and the child's welfare." Olivia studied his face, noting the determined set of his jaw. "This is very generous," she said carefully, "but I can't help feeling it would compromise your position. A single man offering housing to an unmarried woman in my condition, it would confirm the worst suspicions." Luke's expression softened. "Olivia, my reputation can weather a few raised eyebrows. Yours has already endured the worst the town has to offer. What matters now is practical considerations for the future." He was right, of course. The cottage, while adequate for her alone, would be challenging with an infant, especially as winter approached. The isolation that had provided a shield from judgment would become a liability when she needed support most. "I'll consider it," she promised, unwilling to commit immediately to a decision with such far-reaching implications. Luke nodded, accepting her caution. "That's all I ask." The moment was interrupted by Sally's appearance, eager to show Olivia a nest of quail eggs she had discovered near the barn. As the girl led her teacher away, chattering excitedly, Olivia glanced back to find Luke watching them, his expression unreadable yet somehow affecting. That evening, as Miguel drove her back to the cottage, Olivia found herself weighing Luke's offer against her dwindling alternatives. The teaching position provided enough income to sustain her basic needs, but little margin for emergencies or the additional expenses a baby would bring. The security of housing on the Double F was tempting not just for practical reasons, but for the sense of connection it represented to Luke, to Sally, to the small community that had begun to form around her despite her precarious social standing. By her next teaching day, Olivia had reached a decision. After Sally's lessons concluded, she sought out Luke in his office, a small room adjoining the parlor where he managed the ranch's business affairs. "I've considered your offer," she began without preamble. Luke set aside the ledger he had been reviewing, giving her his full attention. "And I would like to accept with one condition." Olivia clasped her hands together to still their slight trembling. "I insist on paying rent a fair amount deducted from my teaching wages. I cannot accept charity even from you." A smile touched Luke's lips, respect evident in his gaze. "Not charity, Olivia, good business. Sally's education is worth far more than I'm currently paying you." "Nevertheless," she insisted, "my pride, if nothing else, requires it." After a moment's consideration, Luke nodded. "Very well, we'll adjust the arrangement accordingly." The matter settled, a weight lifted from Olivia's shoulders. The future, while still uncertain, seemed less daunting with this peace secured. As she turned to leave, Luke's voice stopped her. "Olivia." He rose from his desk, moving to stand before her. "There's something else I've been wanting to say." Something in his tone, a careful restraint that suggested deeper currents beneath, caused Olivia's heart to quicken. "Yes." Luke's gaze held hers steadily. "I want you to know that my offer of the house, my support, comes with no expectations beyond what we've already established. Your position as Sally's teacher, your independence, those are assured, regardless of any other developments between us." The deliberately vague phrasing left room for interpretation, but the intensity in his eyes conveyed a meaning that sent warmth spreading through Olivia's chest. "I appreciate that clarity," she said softly, "and I would not want you to think I've accepted out of any obligation or gratitude that might lead to such developments." Luke's expression relaxed into a genuine smile. "I never thought that for a moment." The understanding that passed between them remained unspoken, but clear an acknowledgement of growing feelings. tempered by the complexity of their situation and a mutual respect for appropriate timing. As August gave way to September, preparations for Olivia's move to the ranch house intensified. Luke oversaw repairs and improvements personally, ensuring the small dwelling was weather-tight and comfortable. Olivia visited the property on a Sunday afternoon, finding it far more appealing than she had anticipated. Two good-sized rooms, a sturdy stove, windows that captured both morning and afternoon light, and a small porch overlooking a stand of cottonwoods that provided natural privacy from the main ranch compound. "This is lovely," she told Luke as they stood in what would become the main living space. "Far better than I expected." "Mrs. Redhorse's daughter kept it well," Luke replied, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I've added some shelving for your books, and there's a cradle coming from the carpenter in Prescott next week." The mention of the cradle, a tangible preparation for her child's arrival, brought both reality and gratitude rushing in. "You've thought of everything," Olivia said, emotion thickening her voice. "Not everything," Luke admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Mrs. Redhorse has a list of items I'd never have considered. Apparently babies require an astonishing amount of equipment for such small beings." The casual reference to his involvement in planning for her child's arrival struck Olivia powerfully. It had been so long since anyone other than herself had acknowledged the baby as a welcome addition rather than an unfortunate circumstance to be managed. "Luke," she began, uncertain how to express the depth of her appreciation without crossing the careful boundaries they had established. He seemed to understand without explanation. "You're not alone in this, Olivia," he said simply. "Not anymore." The words, so straightforward yet so profound, broke through the last of her carefully maintained composure. Tears welled in her eyes, and before she could think better of it, Olivia stepped forward and embraced him, her face pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. After a startled moment, Luke's arms came around her, one hand cradling the back of her head with unexpected tenderness. They stood together in the empty house, the future it represented stretching before them, uncertain, but somehow full of possibility. The embrace ended by mutual, unspoken agreement, both stepping back with a newfound awareness of the shifting terrain between them. No apologies were offered or expected. The moment had been honest if premature. "I should get you back to town," Luke said finally, his voice rougher than usual. Storm clouds building to the west. As they drove back toward Wickenburg, Olivia found herself studying his profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the careful way he held himself, a man accustomed to containing his strength. What was developing between them defied simple categorization. Not quite courtship, which would be inappropriate given her condition. Not merely friendship, though that formed its foundation. Something new, shaped by their unique circumstances and the qualities they had recognized in each other: his steadfastness, her resilience, a mutual respect that had grown despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges they had faced. The move took place the following weekend, with Miguel and two other ranch hands transporting Olivia's modest belongings from the cottage to her new home on the Double F. Luke had arranged for Mrs. Thompson from the Mercantile to assist, providing a female presence that helped mitigate potential gossip about the arrangement. "Such a sensible solution," Mrs. Thompson commented as they arranged Olivia's books on the new shelves. "Much better for a young woman in your condition to be near help, especially with your experience as a teacher benefiting little Sally." Olivia recognized the statement for what it was: a public justification she could use when inevitably questioned about her change of residence. Mr. Forrester has been most considerate of my circumstances, she agreed carefully. Mrs. Thompson's shrewd eyes assessed her. He's a good man, Luke Forrester. Not one for town socials or church picnics, but solid as they come. Treats his workers fair, pays his bills prompt. She paused, arranging a small vase on the window sill. Lost his wife, you know, years ago before he came to Wickenburg. This was news to Olivia. Luke had never mentioned a wife, though his status as Sally's guardian had obviously suggested some family history. I didn't know, she said, trying to mask her surprise. Influenza took both his sister and her husband within days of each other, from what I understand, Mrs. Thompson continued. Same epidemic that claimed his wife earlier that year. Left him with Sally to raise and a mountain of grief to shoulder. That's when he sold his Texas holdings and came west. She straightened a picture frame with unnecessary precision. Some said he was running from memories. I think he was seeking a fresh start. The revelation added new depth to Olivia's understanding of Luke's character, his solitary nature, his fierce devotion to Sally, the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his steady gaze. It explained, too, his empathy for her own situation. He understood what it meant to rebuild a life from unexpected ruins. By evening, the house was arranged to Olivia's satisfaction, her few possessions distributed to create a sense of home. Mrs. Thompson departed with promises to visit again soon, leaving Olivia alone to absorb the reality of her new situation. As darkness fell, she sat on the small porch, watching stars emerge above the cottonwoods. The ranch was quiet at this distance, only the occasional low of cattle or distant whinny of horses breaking the stillness. A lantern approached along the path from the main house, its light swaying gently with the bearer's stride. Luke materialized from the darkness, the lantern casting his features in warm amber light. "Everything settled?" he asked, remaining at the foot of the porch steps. "Yes, thank you," Olivia replied, oddly comfortable with his presence in this liminal moment between her old life and new. Mrs. Thompson was a tremendous help. Good woman, Elizabeth Thompson, known her and Thomas since I bought this place. He set the lantern on the step. Brought you something, a housewarming gift of sorts. From inside his coat he withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, he said, almost apologetically, extending it toward her. Olivia accepted the parcel, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Unwrapping it carefully, she found a beautifully bound volume of poetry Wordsworth, the gilt lettering on the spine catching the lantern light. I noticed you didn't have him in your collection, Luke explained, watching her expression. Thought you might enjoy his perspectives on nature, living out here now. The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just a book, but one specifically chosen with attention to her preferences, touched Olivia deeply. This is lovely, she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. Thank you. Luke nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. There's a passage marked page 43. Reminded me of our conversations. Intrigued, Olivia opened the book to the indicated page, finding a small ribbon marking a section of lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. She read silently. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. The words resonated with their shared understanding of how life's difficulties could deepen rather than diminish one's appreciation for beauty. It's perfect, she said softly, looking up to find Luke watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment it seemed he might climb the steps, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained. Instead, he reached for the lantern, his expression softening into a smile. Sleep well, Olivia. I'll see you tomorrow for Sally's lessons. Good night, Luke, she replied, clutching the book to her chest as he retreated down the path, the lantern's glow diminishing until it was swallowed by the darkness near the main house. As Olivia prepared for bed in her new home, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected turns her life had taken since that day in the alley, how what had seemed like her lowest moment had led, through a series of unpredictable events, to this place of tentative security and dawning hope. The baby shifted within her, a reminder of both past mistakes and future possibilities. Whatever came next, she was no longer facing it entirely alone. September progressed with a rhythm that brought unexpected contentment to Olivia's days. Mornings were devoted to Sally's education, afternoons to preparing lessons and attending to her own increasingly limited activities as her time grew nearer. Mrs. Red Horse visited regularly, bringing herbal teas and practical advice delivered with dry humor that often left Olivia laughing despite her anxieties. Luke maintained a respectful distance. Their interactions focused primarily on Sally's progress and the practicalities of ranch life. Yet Olivia was acutely aware of his attention to her comfort fresh vegetables appearing on her doorstep. Firewood stacked neatly beside the house before she could mention the need. Ranch hands casually available whenever a task required strength she no longer possessed. One crisp, late September afternoon, as Olivia sat on her porch enjoying the cooler air, she spotted Sally racing along the path from the main house, her braids flying behind her. "Miss Edwards," the girl called, breathless with excitement. "Uncle Luke says you must come quick. There's a surprise." Alarmed by the urgency, Olivia rose awkwardly, her advanced state making such movements increasingly difficult. "Is something wrong, Sally?" "No, it's wonderful," Sally assured her, practically bouncing with barely contained excitement. "But Uncle Luke says I'm not to tell you what it is." "You must come see." Intrigued despite her discomfort, Olivia allowed Sally to lead her along the path toward the main house. As they approached, she noticed an unfamiliar wagon in the yard and heard voices from the porch, Luke's deep tones and another, feminine voice that struck a chord of half-forgotten memory. Rounding the corner, Olivia stopped short, her hand flying to her throat in shock. Standing beside Luke on the porch, travel-worn but smiling tentatively, was her younger sister Margaret. "Maggie," Olivia whispered, disbelieving. "Hello, Livy," her sister replied, using the childhood nickname no one in Wickenburg had ever heard. "It's been a long time." For a suspended moment, Olivia stood frozen, a kaleidoscope of emotions: joy, confusion, apprehension rendering her speechless. Then Maggie descended the steps and crossed the yard, embracing her awkwardly around her protruding belly. "How?" Olivia managed, returning the embrace with trembling arms. Maggie stepped back, her eyes the same hazel as Olivia's own, bright with unshed tears. "Your Mr. Forrester found me. Hired a Pinkerton agent to trace your family after you mentioned St. Louis." Stunned, Olivia turned to Luke, who stood watching the reunion with careful neutrality, though satisfaction showed in the slight upturn of his lips. "You did this?" she asked, her voice scarcely above a whisper. He nodded once. "Thought you might want family nearby with the baby coming." The simple explanation belied the extraordinary effort and expense such an endeavor must have required. Before Olivia could begin to form a response, Sally tugged at her hand. "Is this really your sister, Miss Edwards?" the girl asked, studying Maggie with frank curiosity. "She looks like you, but prettier." "Sally," Luke admonished, but Maggie laughed, the same bright sound Olivia remembered from their childhood. "I'm the younger model," Maggie explained to Sally with a conspiratorial wink. "Though nowhere near as smart as my big sister." The familiar banter, so reminiscent of their relationship before circumstances had separated them, broke through the last of Olivia's shock. "I can't believe you're really here," she said, tears finally spilling over. "It's been almost 2 years." "I know," Maggie replied, suddenly serious. "After Father's funeral, when Uncle George took over the house, I should have written more, should have tried harder to find you when your letters stopped." The reference to their family's dissolution after their father's death, their uncle's cold assumption of authority, his harsh judgment of Olivia's teaching ambitions brought painful memories rushing back. Olivia had fled to make her own way rather than submit to his plans for her future, never imagining the twisting path that decision would set her upon. "None of that matters now," Olivia assured her sister, unwilling to revisit old wounds in this moment of unexpected reunion. "You're here now. That's what counts." Luke cleared his throat. "Why don't we continue this inside? Mrs. Redhorse has prepared refreshments and you can speak privately." The suggestion was tactful, recognizing that the sisters would have much to discuss that didn't require an audience. As they moved toward the house, Olivia caught Luke's arm, holding him back slightly. "I don't know how to thank you for this," she said quietly, emotion making her voice unsteady. Luke's gaze was warm as it met hers. "Your smile just now is thanks enough," he replied simply. "Go be with your sister. We can talk later." The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation, tears and laughter as Olivia and Maggie began the process of bridging the years of separation. With Sally as an attentive audience, Maggie recounted her journey from St. Louis, the train to Santa Fe, the stage coach to Prescott, the final leg to Wickenburg in the company of a cattle buyer Luke had arranged to escort her safely. Mr. Forrester's letter was quite a shock, Maggie admitted as they sat in the ranch house parlor. "I hadn't heard from you in so long, and then to receive word not only of your whereabouts but your condition." She glanced meaningfully at Olivia's belly. "I'm sorry you had to learn of it that way," Olivia said, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I didn't write because I was ashamed. Afraid of what everyone would think." Maggie reached across the space between them, taking Olivia's hand. "I won't pretend I wasn't surprised. My proper, careful sister, always the example I was meant to follow." A mischievous smile softened her words. "But then I thought, if Livy can scandalize St. Louis society, perhaps there's hope for me yet." The jest, so characteristic of Maggie's irreverent spirit, broke the tension. Olivia found herself laughing despite the seriousness of the subject. "I've missed you terribly," she confessed. "Especially these past months." As the afternoon waned, Luke suggested that Maggie might stay in the small guest room at the ranch house until other arrangements could be made. "Unless you'd prefer the hotel in town," he added, deferring to the sisters' preference. "I'd rather stay close to Olivia," Maggie decided. "If that's not imposing too much on your hospitality." "Not at all," Luke assured her. "Sally will be delighted to have company. She finds the ranch too quiet sometimes, I think." The arrangement settled, Olivia reluctantly prepared to return to her own house as evening approached. Her back had been troubling her all day, a persistent ache that she attributed to the excitement and extended sitting. "I'll walk you home," Luke offered as she rose stiffly from her chair. "I can manage," Olivia began to protest, but a particularly sharp twinge made her wince visibly. Luke's expression sharpened with concern. "Olivia." Before she could respond, Mrs. Redhorse appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. "How long have the pains been coming?" she asked directly, startled by the question. Olivia stammered. "It's just discomfort from sitting too long. Not really pain." Mrs. Redhorse's expression remained skeptical. "When did it start?" "This morning, I suppose," Olivia admitted. but it's nothing regular, just an ache." The older woman moved to Olivia's side, placing a weathered hand on her belly without preamble. After a moment, she nodded decisively. "Early labor. Not urgent yet, but we should prepare." She turned to Maggie. "Good timing, sister. You'll be needed tonight." The pronouncement sent a wave of panic through Olivia. "But it's too early," she protested. "Nearly 3 weeks before you expected." "Babies come when they decide, not when we plan," Mrs. Redhorse replied philosophically. "This one is ready to meet you." Luke had gone very still, his expression caught between concern and a sort of reverent apprehension. "What do you need?" he asked Mrs. Redhorse, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "Hot water, clean linens, privacy," the midwife listed. "And patience. First babies often take their time." Maggie moved to Olivia's side, supporting her arm. "Should we go to her house?" she asked Mrs. Redhorse. The older woman considered briefly. "No, better here. The bed is larger, the stove more reliable, and I have my supplies close at hand." As they guided Olivia toward the guest room, Luke stepped forward, catching her hand briefly. "You'll be fine," he said with quiet conviction. "Mrs. Redhorse has delivered half the children in the territory, and your sister is here now." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be just outside if you need anything at all." The simple promise of his presence, steady and unwavering, steadied Olivia's racing heart. "Thank you," she whispered. The hours that followed passed in a blur of intensifying pain, punctuated by Mrs. Redhorse's calm instructions and Maggie's supportive presence. As night fell and then gave way to the first pale light of dawn, Olivia's world narrowed to the tremendous task before her bringing her child safely into the world. Outside the room, Luke maintained his vigil, pacing the hallway until Sally finally fell asleep on the parlor sofa, then sitting motionless beside the closed door, flinching at each muffled cry that penetrated the wood. Just as the sun crested the eastern mountains, a new sound filled the ranch house, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Luke rose to his feet, staring at the door as if he could see through it by sheer force of will. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the door finally opened, revealing a tired but radiant Maggie. "She's asking for you," she said simply, stepping aside to allow him entry. Olivia lay propped against pillows, her face pale with exhaustion but illuminated by a joy Luke had never witnessed before. In her arms lay a tiny bundle, only a thatch of dark hair visible from the doorway. "Luke," she greeted him, her voice hoarse but steady. "Come meet him, a boy." Luke approached the bed with careful steps, as if afraid his presence might somehow disturb the fragile peace of this moment. Olivia shifted the blanket, revealing the small, perfect face of her son. "James Lucas Edwards," she said softly, "named for his grandfather. And for you, if that's acceptable." The honor, unexpected and profound, rendered Luke momentarily speechless. He stared at the tiny being who now bore his name, emotions too complex for words tightening his throat. "May I?" he finally managed, extending his arms with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Olivia nodded, carefully transferring the swaddled infant. Luke cradled the child with surprising competence, his large hands gentle as they supported the delicate head and body. "He's perfect," he murmured, studying the miniature features with wonder. "Strong, too, from the sound of his complaints." A tired laugh escaped Olivia. "Mrs. Redhorse says he has excellent lungs. A good sign, apparently." Luke returned his gaze to her face, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes, the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Yet she had never appeared more beautiful to him, triumphant, maternal, completely present in this moment of new beginning. "You should rest now," he said, reluctantly returning the baby to her arms. You've done the hardest work imaginable." "Wait," Olivia said as he turned to leave. "There's something I need to say while I have the courage." Luke paused, his expression open but guarded. "Everything you've done for us," she began, glancing down at her son, "has been extraordinary. Beyond kindness, beyond duty, beyond what anyone could reasonably expect." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I want you to know that I understand there's no obligation attached to any of it, no expectation of permanent arrangements or continued involvement beyond what we've already established." The declaration, offered with such careful dignity, struck Luke like a physical blow. Did she truly believe he would withdraw now? That his support had been merely temporary charity rather than the expression of deeper feelings he had struggled to contain? "Olivia," he said, returning to the bedside and kneeling so their eyes were level, "I need to be very clear about something." He paused, ensuring he had her full attention. "Every kindness, every assistance I've offered has been given freely, without expectation of repayment or obligation." "That remains true." Another pause, deeper breath. "But if you believe my involvement in your life and your son's life is something I would willingly relinquish now that he's safely arrived, you've misunderstood my intentions entirely." Confusion flickered across Olivia's features. "I don't understand." Luke's gaze never wavered from hers. "I'm trying to say, with perhaps less eloquence than the occasion deserves, that I care for you deeply. Not out of pity or duty, but because of who you are, your strength, your dignity, your kindness. I've watched you face the town's judgment with grace, prepare for motherhood with courage, build a new life from difficult circumstances." He glanced at the sleeping infant. "And now, I've seen you bring this new life into the world with the same determination that has marked everything you do." The words hung between them, more revealing than any he had previously offered. Olivia's eyes widened as their implications registered. "Luke," he raised a hand, gently interrupting. "You don't need to respond now. You're exhausted, overwhelmed, and this isn't the time for such discussions." He rose, straightening to his full height. "I just wanted you to know that my support, my presence in your life is not conditional on your condition or circumstances. It never has been." Emotion welled in Olivia's eyes, spilling over onto cheeks already tracked with tears from her labor. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to articulate more complex feelings through her exhaustion. Luke nodded once, understanding in his expression. "Rest now," he said softly. "We'll talk when you're stronger." As he left the room, closing the door quietly behind him, Olivia looked down at her sleeping son, his tiny features peaceful in repose. "Your namesake is quite a man, little one," she murmured. "Perhaps the finest I've ever known." The days following James Lucas's birth passed in a blur of adjustment as Olivia navigated the unfamiliar terrain of new motherhood. Maggie proved an invaluable support, her practical nature compensating for her lack of experience with infants. Mrs. Redhorse visited daily, checking on both mother and child with experienced hands and dispensing advice with her characteristic blend of wisdom and dry humor. Luke maintained a respectful distance, understanding Olivia's need for privacy and recovery. He visited briefly each day, more to inquire after their needs than to intrude on the feminine domain the bedroom had become. His interactions with the infant were carefully measured, admiring rather than presumptuous, interested, but not claiming. On the 5th day, when Olivia felt strong enough to leave the bedroom, she found Luke on the veranda, Sally beside him as he taught her to carve a simple whistle from a branch of cottonwood. "Miss Edwards," Sally exclaimed, jumping up from her seat. "You're feeling better." "Much better, thank you," Olivia confirmed, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. Though I think you should start calling me Olivia now since I'm no longer officially your teacher." Sally considered this, her head tilted. "But you'll still teach me sometimes, won't you? Even with the baby." "Of course," Olivia assured her. "Once I've recovered fully and we establish a routine with little James." Luke had risen when she appeared, his expression warming as he took in her improved color and steadier stance. "You look well," he said simply. "I feel more human today," she admitted. "Maggie insisted I get some fresh air while she watches James." She settled into a chair, grateful to be upright but still conscious of her body's weakness after the ordeal of childbirth. "The weather is perfect." "October's finest," Luke agreed, resuming his seat. "First frost can't be far off, though." The mundane observation whether always safe territory in uncertain conversations nonetheless carried weighted implications about the changing seasons, the passage of time, the need for secure shelter in the coming winter months. Olivia understood these undercurrents, recognizing that their unfinished conversation from the night of James's birth still hovered between them. "Sally," Luke said, turning to his niece, "would you fetch Miss Edwards Olivia a glass of lemonade? Mrs. Redhorse made a fresh pitcher this morning." The girl nodded eagerly, happy to be useful, and disappeared into the house. Alone for the first moment since James's birth, they regarded each other with newfound awareness not just of their feelings, which had been building for months, but of the practicalities that now demanded consideration. "How is motherhood treating you?" Luke asked, his tone deliberately light. Olivia smiled, the expression genuine despite her fatigue. "It's overwhelming and wonderful in equal measure. I never imagined it was possible to love someone so immediately and completely." Luke nodded, understanding in his gaze. "That's how it was with Sally after Caroline and Robert died. One moment she was my niece, someone I cared for but visited only occasionally. The next, she was my entire responsibility, and I couldn't imagine life without her." The parallel between their experiences, both thrust into unexpected parental roles through different circumstances, created another point of connection between them. "Luke," Olivia began carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said. The night James was born." He stilled, his attention sharpening. "Yes, you spoke of caring for me, of wanting to remain present in my life and our lives," she clarified, though James was currently sleeping peacefully in Maggie's care. "I need you to understand something important." Luke's expression remained neutral, though tension was evident in the set of his shoulders. "I'm listening." Olivia took a steadying breath. "When I came to Wickenburg, I was fleeing a situation in St. Louis, not just my uncle's control, but a relationship that had proven less than honorable." Understanding dawned in Luke's eyes. "James's father," he said quietly. She nodded. "James Harrington was charming, persuasive, the son of one of my father's business associates. We were indiscreet based on promises he made." The admission cost her, bringing a flush of shame to her cheeks despite her determination to speak honestly. "When I discovered I was with child, he disappeared. Left St. Louis entirely, I later learned. His family sent him east to avoid the scandal." Luke's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I couldn't bear the shame of remaining in St. Louis, where everyone would know. Teaching positions were available in the Western Territories, so I applied and came here, hoping to establish myself before my condition became apparent." She gave a sad smile. "We see how well that plan succeeded." "You did the best you could with an impossible situation," Luke said, his voice gentle but firm. "No one could ask more." His defense, offered so readily, eased something tight in Olivia's chest. "My point," she continued, "is that I've learned caution. I can't afford to misinterpret kindness or concern for something deeper, not with James to consider now." She met his gaze directly. "So if I've misunderstood your intentions, or if your feelings are born more of compassion than affection, I need to know." Luke studied her face for a long moment, his expression serious. "Olivia, when I first saw you in that alley, being tormented by those women, I was angry. Not at you, at them, at a society that would condemn a woman for circumstances they knew nothing about. I offered help because it was the decent thing to do." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "But every interaction since has deepened my respect, my admiration, and yes, my affection for you as a person, not as a cause or a charity." The sincerity in his voice, the steady directness of his gaze, convinced her in a way elaborate protestations never could have. "I believe you," she said softly. Relief flickered across his features. "Good, because what I'm about to propose requires that trust as its foundation." Before he could continue, Sally burst through the door, carefully balancing a glass of lemonade. "Here you are, Miss Olivia," she corrected herself proudly. "Uncle Luke, Mrs. Redhorse says it's time for your medicine." Luke's expression shifted to one of good-natured resignation. "The lady is relentless," he observed, rising from his chair. "We'll continue this conversation later," he promised Olivia, his gaze communicating the importance he placed on their interrupted discussion. Later came that evening, after dinner had been cleared away, and Sally persuaded into bed, despite her protests about missing the adult conversation. Maggie had tactfully retired to the guest room with James, claiming fatigue from a day of baby minding, though her knowing glance at Olivia suggested she understood the need for privacy. Luke invited Olivia to join him on the veranda, where the cooling October air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. He had built a small fire in a brazier to ward off the evening chill, its light casting their faces in warm, flickering illumination. "You were about to propose something," Olivia prompted once they were settled, her curiosity having simmered throughout the intervening hours. Luke nodded, his expression serious in the firelight. "Before I do, I want to be clear about my feelings. I care for you deeply, Olivia. More than I expected to care for anyone after losing Emily." The name, his wife's name, spoken aloud for the first time, hung in the night air between them. "Mrs. Thompson mentioned you were widowed," Olivia said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." A shadow crossed his features. "It was a long time ago, 6 years this winter." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I thought that part of my life was finished, that raising Sally and building this ranch would be enough." His gaze met hers across the small space between their chairs. "Then you arrived in Wickenburg, and eventually into my life." The simple statement, delivered without flourish or excessive sentiment, affected Olivia more deeply than any flowery declaration could have. "I never expected to find someone like you," she admitted. "Especially not after James's father. I thought that kind of trust was beyond my reach now." Luke's hand moved across the space between them, covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. "What I'm proposing is a partnership," he said carefully. "A marriage if you're willing, but one built on mutual respect and honest affection rather than desperation or societal expectations." Though she had begun to anticipate something of the sort, the directness of his proposal still took Olivia's breath away. "Luke," he squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. This isn't about rescuing you from your situation. You've proven more than capable of managing that yourself. It's about building something meaningful together, if that's what you want." Olivia turned her hand beneath his, linking their fingers in a gesture more intimate than any they had yet shared. "And James," she asked, needing to be certain of his feelings about her son. "Would be my son in every way that matters," Luke replied without hesitation. just as Sally would become your daughter if she consents. A family, Olivia. Unconventional in its beginnings, perhaps, but real nonetheless. The vision he presented, a family formed not by blood but by choice, by mutual care and commitment, resonated deeply with Olivia's own unspoken hopes. Yet caution born of bitter experience made her hesitate. "May I have some time?" she asked. "Not because I doubt your sincerity or my own feelings, but because this decision affects more than just us." Luke nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Take all the time you need. My proposal doesn't expire." The gentle humor in his tone broke the tension of the moment, drawing a smile from Olivia despite the weight of the conversation. "Thank you," she said, squeezing his hand before reluctantly withdrawing hers. "For understanding, for waiting, for everything, really." As they sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance in the brazier, Olivia found herself contemplating a future she had never dared imagine during those dark days when the town's judgment had seemed the final word on her worth. A husband who respected her, a stepdaughter who adored her, a home built on honesty rather than pretense, all possibilities that had seemed forever closed to her, until Luke Forrester had stopped to offer assistance in an alley 5 months ago. The decision, when it came, arrived with the quiet certainty of sunrise, inevitable, illuminating, transforming the landscape with new clarity. 3 days after Luke's proposal, as Olivia sat nursing James in the rocker beside her bed, she looked up to find Luke standing in the doorway, a tentative expression on his face. "May I come in?" he asked, respecting the privacy of this maternal moment. Olivia nodded, adjusting her shawl to provide modest coverage. "Of course." Luke entered, his gaze warm as it took in the tableau of mother and child. "Mrs. Redhorse says he's gaining weight nicely," he observed, maintaining a respectful distance. "He's a good eater," Olivia confirmed with a smile. "Though his schedule leaves something to be desired. Maggie claims she hasn't had a full night's sleep since his arrival." "She doesn't seem to mind," Luke noted, having observed the affectionate relationship developing between the sisters. "Though she mentioned something about returning to St. Louis before Christmas." The reminder of Maggie's eventual departure brought Olivia's thoughts back to her decision, one that would shape not just her future but James's as well. "Yes, she has a position with a milliner there. She can only stay another few weeks." Luke nodded, his expression turning more serious. "Olivia, I don't mean to press you, but—" "Yes," she interrupted simply. He blinked, momentarily confused. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you," Olivia clarified, a smile spreading across her face at his stunned expression. "If the offer still stands." Joy transformed Luke's features, years seeming to fall away as he crossed the room in 2 long strides, kneeling beside her chair. "It stands," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "You're certain?" Olivia shifted James to her shoulder, freeing one hand to touch Luke's face, their first such intimate contact. "I'm certain," she said softly. "Not because I need rescuing or security, though you've offered both. But because I've come to love you, Luke Forrester, for the man you are, honorable, kind, steadfast." The declaration, the first time either had spoken explicitly of love, hung in the air between them, momentous, yet somehow inevitable. Luke covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "I love you, Olivia Edwards," he replied, his voice low and fervent. "Have for longer than I had any right to." The admission brought tears to Olivia's eyes, not of sadness, but of release, of acceptance, of a joy she had thought forever beyond her reach. "Then it seems we have a wedding to plan," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Luke's gaze moved to the infant on her shoulder, now sleeping peacefully after his meal. "May I?" he asked, extending his arms. Olivia transferred James carefully, watching as Luke cradled the tiny form against his broad chest with practiced ease. The sight her son in the arms of the man who would become his father created a fullness in her heart that bordered on pain. "What will people say?" she asked suddenly, the practical consideration intruding on the moment. "The town already believes the worst about my character." "Now they'll assume, let them assume what they will," Luke interrupted, his tone dismissive. "Those who matter will understand the truth. Those who don't," he shrugged, a movement so gentle it didn't disturb the sleeping infant, "their opinions aren't worth considering." The simplicity of his perspective, so different from the rigid social constraints that had shaped Olivia's earlier life, offered a freedom she was only beginning to recognize. "You make it sound so straightforward," she marveled. "Sometimes it is," Luke replied, his gaze steady on hers. "Not always, but in us I believe it can be. We choose each other, choose to build something together. The rest is just noise." As Olivia looked at the man before her, strong yet gentle, principled yet pragmatic, she felt the last of her reservations dissolving. The path forward wasn't without challenges, but with Luke beside her, facing them seemed not just possible but almost welcome, each obstacle an opportunity to strengthen the foundation they were building together. "When?" she asked, practical considerations asserting themselves. "And where?" "The church might not, justice of the peace in Prescott," Luke suggested. "Or here on the ranch with Pastor Jenkins if he's willing. If not, Judge Hollister owes me a favor." His free hand found hers again, fingers intertwining. "As for when, that's for you to decide. When you're fully recovered, when you're ready." The consideration behind his response, putting her needs first, ensuring her comfort with the timing, confirmed again the rightness of her decision. "Soon," Olivia decided. "Before Maggie leaves. I want my sister at my wedding." Luke's smile deepened at her certainty. "Then soon it will be." They were married 3 weeks later on a crisp November morning, the ceremony performed by a surprisingly willing Pastor Jenkins in the main parlor of the ranch house. Maggie stood as Olivia's witness, radiant in a new dress Luke had insisted on purchasing for the occasion. Sally served as impromptu flower girl, scattering late-blooming wildflowers before the makeshift altar with solemn concentration. James, now nearly 8 weeks old, slept peacefully in Mrs. Red Horse's experienced arms throughout the brief ceremony, waking only as his mother and new father sealed their vows with a kiss that lingered just long enough to make Maggie clear her throat meaningfully. The small reception that followed, attended by ranch hands and their families, Mrs. Thompson and her husband, and a few other Wickenburg residents who had shown kindness to Olivia during her difficult months, had the informal warmth of a family gathering rather than a formal wedding celebration. Mrs. Red Horse and her daughters had prepared a feast that combined traditional native dishes with frontier staples, creating a unique blend that symbolized the diverse influences that had shaped the Double FTKS community. As afternoon faded toward evening, guests gradually departed until only family remained: Maggie, Sally, Mrs. Red Horse, and the newly formed Forrester family. Luke had surprised Olivia by arranging for Miguel to drive Sally to stay with Mrs. Thompson for 2 nights, giving the newlyweds privacy while ensuring his niece's enjoyment with a promised shopping excursion, and attend a magic lantern show visiting Wickenburg. "You've thought of everything," Olivia marveled as they stood on the veranda, watching Miguel's wagon disappear down the drive with a wildly waving Sally. "Not everything," Luke admitted, his arm secure around her waist. "I'm sure I've forgotten a dozen details. Mrs. Red Horse will scold me for tomorrow." Olivia laughed, leaning into his embrace with newfound freedom. The day had passed in a blur of emotion and activity, leaving her simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "I can't quite believe we're actually married," she confessed. Luke's expression softened as he gazed down at her. Having second thoughts already, Mrs. Forrester. The new name, her new identity, sent a pleasant shiver through Olivia. "Not for a moment," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face in a gesture that was becoming familiar between them. Just adjusting to the reality after so many months of uncertainty. Understanding crossed his features. "It's been a long road from that alley in Wickenburg," he agreed, "though I'd travel it again without hesitation, knowing where it led." The sentiment, so simply expressed yet profound in its implications, touched Olivia deeply. "As would I," she said softly. "Every difficult step brought me here to you, to this moment. I wouldn't change any of it, even the painful parts." Luke's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "May I kiss my wife?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "I believe that's expected," Olivia replied, warmth spreading through her at the proprietary term. His lips met hers with gentleness that gradually deepened into something more profound, not just affection or attraction, but the promise of a shared future built on mutual respect and genuine love. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Olivia felt a certainty settle in her heart. This man, this marriage, this life they were building together was not a compromise or a solution to her difficulties, but a gift she had never expected to receive. "I should check on James," she said reluctantly, aware of her maternal responsibilities even in this moment of personal happiness. "Maggie said she'd bring him to our room when he wakes for his evening feeding," Luke assured her. She and Mrs. Red Horse have apparently coordinated a comprehensive schedule for the next 2 days. The consideration behind these arrangements, allowing them time together while ensuring James's needs were met, was typical of the thoughtfulness Luke had consistently demonstrated toward both her and her son. As twilight settled over the ranch, they retired to the master bedroom, now their shared domain, where Luke had arranged for a small private dinner to be waiting. The simple meal of cold chicken, fresh bread, and fruit provided nourishment without requiring them to rejoin the household, a consideration for which Olivia was grateful after the emotional intensity of the day. Their first night as husband and wife was characterized by the same blend of tenderness and passion that marked their relationship. Luke's innate respect for her comfort and readiness, balanced by a depth of feeling that transformed physical intimacy into a profound expression of their commitment. In his arms, Olivia discovered healing for wounds she had scarcely acknowledged, her past experiences of betrayal gradually receding before the reality of genuine love freely given and received. When Maggie brought a hungry James to them in the early morning hours, Luke didn't retreat to give them privacy as he had previously, but instead sat beside Olivia as she nursed, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture of inclusion and support. The simple tableau mother-father-child created a sense of completeness that brought unexpected tears to Olivia's eyes. "What is it?" Luke asked softly, noting her emotion. "Just happiness," she replied, smiling through her tears. "A year ago, I never imagined this would be possible for me, a husband who loves me, a healthy child, a home where we're both truly welcome." Luke's expression grew serious. "You deserve all of it, Olivia. Never doubt that." The conviction in his voice, his absolute certainty of her worth, despite the circumstances that had brought her to Wickenburg in disgrace, was perhaps the greatest gift he had given her, beyond even his name and protection. As dawn brightened the eastern sky, painting their bedroom in soft golden light, Olivia looked at the man beside her husband, James's father in every way that mattered, the foundation of this new life they were building together, and felt a peace that transcended mere happiness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their strength multiplied by the love that had found them against all odds in the most unlikely of places. Maggie departed for St. Louis the week before Christmas, promising to return in the spring to see how her nephew had grown. Her visit had bridged the gap between Olivia's old life and new, providing a sense of continuity that helped ease the transition into her role as Luke's wife and mistress of the Double F. The town's reaction to their marriage had been predictably mixed, some approving of Luke's honorable action in saving Olivia from disgrace, others skeptical of his motivations or her character. Luke remained indifferent to the gossip, his focus entirely on establishing their family life and ensuring Olivia's comfort in her new position. Christmas at the ranch was a revelation to Olivia, who had expected a simple frontier observance and instead found traditions that blended Luke's Texas upbringing, Mexican influences from the ranch hands' families, and native customs from Mrs. Redhorse's community. Sally's excitement was infectious as she helped decorate the main house with greenery, strung popcorn garlands, and carefully placed the ornaments Luke had collected over the years. "My mother started this one," she explained to Olivia, showing her a delicate glass bird with faded but still vibrant blue feathers. "Uncle Luke adds one every year to remember her. He says that way she's always part of Christmas, even though she's gone." The thoughtfulness behind the tradition, maintaining connections to loved ones lost while building new memories, touched Olivia deeply. That evening, after Sally had been tucked into bed, vibrating with anticipation for Christmas morning, Olivia presented Luke with a small package. "It's not much," she said as he unwrapped it carefully, "but I wanted to continue the tradition." Inside lay a miniature glass cradle, simple but elegant. "For James's first Christmas," Olivia explained, "and for the beginning of our family." Luke's expression as he examined the ornament spoke volumes: gratitude, love, and a deep appreciation for her understanding of the tradition's significance. Without words, he rose and hung it on the tree beside Sally's mother's bird, the two ornaments catching the firelight as they swayed gently. "Perfect," he said softly, returning to draw Olivia into his embrace. "Just like the family it represents." As winter settled fully over the territory, life at the Double F established its own rhythm. Luke managed the ranch operations with his customary efficiency. Olivia divided her attention between James's care and Sally's continued education, and the household ran smoothly under the combined direction of Mrs. Redhorse and Olivia's growing confidence as mistress of the large home. Spring brought new life to the desert landscape and to the Forrester family as well. James took his first tentative steps in April, just as the wildflowers began their brief but spectacular bloom across the ranch's lower pastures. Sally's 10th birthday was celebrated with a party that included not only the ranch community, but several schoolmates from town, the first time children from Wickenburg had visited since Olivia's disgrace and subsequent marriage. "Mrs. Pemberton says you were the best teacher the school ever had," one little girl confided to Olivia during the celebration. "She says it's a shame about, the baby before you were married." The innocent repetition of adult gossip might once have wounded Olivia deeply. Now, secure in her place and identity, she found herself able to respond with gentle firmness. "Sometimes life doesn't follow the order we expect," she told the child, "but that doesn't make the love any less real or important." The simplicity of this truth, hard-won through months of judgment and uncertainty, had become her touchstone. As she watched Luke teaching James to pet a gentle old mare, his large hands engulfing their son's tiny ones with careful protection, She reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From an alley in Wickenburg, where cruel words had driven her to seek shelter, to this sun-drenched corral where her husband guided their son with patient love, the path had been neither direct nor easy. Yet every step, even those that had seemed to lead only to greater difficulty, had been necessary to reach this place of belonging. No man will want you with that belly. They had sneered that day, their judgment seeming both absolute and inescapable. I've never wanted anyone more, Luke had effectively answered, not with words in that moment, but with actions that spoke his heart more eloquently than any declaration. As James's delighted giggle rose into the clear spring air, Olivia moved to join her family in the corral, her hand resting briefly on her abdomen, where the first fluttering movements of their second child had recently made themselves known. This new life conceived in love and legitimacy, yet no more precious than James, would arrive as winter approached again, completing the circle of seasons that had transformed Olivia from outcast to beloved wife and mother. Luke looked up as she approached, his smile warming at the sight of her. Even now, months into their marriage, such simple evidence of his love could still catch her unawares, filling her with gratitude for the man who had seen beyond judgment to the woman beneath. "Look, Mama," James called, his small face alight with excitement. "Horse." "I see, sweetheart," Olivia replied, joining them at the fence. "She's very beautiful." Luke's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone, his innate attentiveness detecting some subtle change in her demeanor. Olivia smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing with the life they had built together. "Everything is perfect," she assured him. And in that moment, with the desert blooming around them and their family gathered close, it truly was.